very warm welcome to this month's Pacecast. I'm Anita Pace and thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Linda Kilburn. Linda has recently completed a multi-million pound restoration of the Hotham Hall estate and turned it into a luxurious events venue. I'm looking forward to hearing more about how she's done that and about the rest of her successful career. Hello and welcome to Linda.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Right, I'm fascinated about your story. You've achieved a lot in your lifetime, so dial us right back to the beginning and talk about your childhood and where it all began.
Wow, that's a long time ago. But I had a really lovely childhood. I'm a farmer's daughter. And when we were young, we were able to roam the land. And we had a great time as children roaming out. We had about 200 acres at the time. And so we had a lot of freedom, a lot of animals. And it was a really, really nice time, really nice childhood.
Where was this? Where was home?
My home was in Burton-on-Trent.
Oh, right, okay.
Where the beer comes from, which was quite good. And it was a very sort of sleepy town. And I think I always, right from the very beginning, thought that I wouldn't ever stay there. I don't know why, but I'm a Sagittarian and we're renowned travellers.
Right.
And we love roaming the world. And I always had this idea in my mind that I would move out of that area. And I was I was a grammar school girl, so I passed my 11 plus, which I was very lucky because my two sisters didn't, and they went to a different school and they have a very different life to my life. And I'm sure that was to do with my upbringing and my schooling.
Were you the eldest, or?
Yes, I'm the eldest.
Right, okay.
Yes, I'm the eldest. And my entree into grammar school changed my life, really. It was just such an amazing experience. And I felt very proud to be a grammar school girl. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence. Yeah. And also, I suppose, the way that we were taught that we could do anything with our lives. And it was something that was kind of inbred in me right from the beginning. Well, my father actually made me probably an entrepreneur, which is what he was, because he was the first farmer in the UK to turn his farm into a golf course.
Ah.
Which is quite extraordinary because he was a hopeless golfer. And I just moved to London when I was 17. Well, actually, I think I was just before I was 17. And I think in those days, we were much older and wiser, or at least we thought we were. Maybe we weren't.
Because that's quite a young age. So you left home at 16?
Yes, I did.
Oh, right,
yes.
okay.
My father and I didn't really get on all that well at that time of my life because he wanted to keep me as a young girl, really, and he didn't like me going out with boys and stuff like that. And he was quite controlling to protect me, really. But obviously, me being a free spirit, I couldn't bear to be confined or controlled by anybody, really. And so I decided to leave home quite early. But before that, my father, he was a farmer, and he believed really believed that if you had any money, or if you needed anything, you had to earn it. And so, I mean, I was 11 when I had my first job in a butcher shop at my uncle's, and he insisted that I did a Saturday job, and I was only 11. And I often think back to those days, and it was a very interesting time because I learned how to deal with men and the way that they might talk to you as a young girl and all that kind of thing.
Because 11's very young, isn't it?
It's really.
So you're working in the shop or behind the scenes?
I used to put the gelatine in the pork pies.
Oh, right, nice.
And make sausages, clean the windows and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And I had to clean all the house for my auntie as well at the same time and make them lunch. So I was quite young, but I was quite old for my age, I suppose, even in those days. And if I needed any money, I had to earn it. My father would say, right, well, you're going to do this or you've got to do that, and then I'll give you your pocket money. I never got pocket money just like that. Yeah. And it was only 25p anyway, so it wasn't very much.
It's probably a lot in those days.
Yes.
But he instilled, obviously, a very a good work ethic in you at a young age. So what attracted you to London at 16? What was the pull other than the bright lights and excitement?
Well, before that, my father and I fell out, and I moved into Burton-on-Trent into an apartment with another young girl. It cost £5 a week, so you can imagine what it was like. And at the same time, I left school. I just left school, and I got a job as a junior at a company called Delaney Galley, which was I can't even remember what it did. It was a sort of steel making type company, I think. And as a young girl, as a young junior, again, I was thrown to the wolves, really, because I used to take the post around to all the offices and the draftsmen and all that kind of thing. And I had to deal with quite a lot at 16. And Burton-on-Trent was quite a small town. And a friend of mine had moved to London, and she kept writing to me saying, come down here, you'll love it, come down here. And one day I thought, I'm going to go. So I went to see my mum, and my mother was really upset, and she was crying because she hadn't wanted me to leave school anyway, to leave home. And so anyway, she said she'd come to the station with me, and she came to the station with me, and I probably had a couple of plastic bags with all my belongings in them. And I moved to London, to a really, really seedy part of London, which was Praed Street, which is where all the gangsters used to hang out at the time. I didn't know that, obviously. And my friend had a flat in the basement that was absolutely dreadful. It was running water and rodents.
Oh dear.
Horrible, horrible place. But we loved it.
Yeah,
we dressed
London.
It all up.
Yeah.
We put all sorts of things around the apartment, or flat. It was a bedsit. That was a bit much to call it a flat. It was a bedsit. But we had a really good time, and I learned so much about life and how to deal with situations and so on. And I was a receptionist at a company called the Nomad Travellers Club, where we had people from South Africa, Australia, New Zealand who used to come to this club as part of their travelling process. Then it was on all of their itineraries. So I met loads of people from all over the world, which was really lovely. But a couple of things happened that really frightened me, because some gangster came down one day with a shotgun and shot somebody in the club, and I was on reception, so I had to deal with the emergency.
So did you witness it then?
I didn't see it happen, but the guy came up covered in blood. And
oh my God! And how old would you have been then?
I was 17.
Wow.
17. Actually serving underage also. But it was a great experience.
Yeah.
So I decided that wasn't really a good place to be. So I went to work for Mr. Coy of Coy's of Kensington, which sold Rolls Royces, as his PA. That didn't last too long either. I wasn't a brilliant PA. Although I'd done shorthand typing, because at the grammar school that I was at, we did learn shorthand and typing, which
I did at school as well.
Did you?
My age, yeah. I've forgotten art. Actually, people do still use shorthand, don't they? And typing these days is so useful. Touch typing.
Oh, yes, very much so. And thank goodness I did actually learn how to type. Yeah. And I don't use shorthand anymore. But interestingly, someone came to interview me recently, and he did everything in shorthand. And I kept looking, thinking, I know what that word is now.
Yeah, I think there's only really journalists who still use it.
Yeah.
But it's a shame it's a dying art. So sorry, I interrupted you. Yes, so you weren't a very good PA.
No, not particularly. No, he was very autocratic,
right?
Mr. Coy, and everyone sort of almost bowed down to him when they went into his office. So that was a bit tricky. And I decided with a friend that we were going to go to Spain, to Alicante, that sort of area, to have a bit of a roam around Europe. So we decided that's what we were going to do. So we topped and tailed in a bed for about 6 months.
Was this your bedsit mate?
No, this is another friend, a New Zealand girl who I met at the Nomad Travellers Club,
right.
And we became best friends, and we're still friends today.
Oh, that's nice.
And she persuaded me that we should go to Europe on a bit of a travel, and we found someone who sold us some tickets for, I think they were £13 each, the tickets to Alicante, and we took off to Alicante, not knowing where we were going or what we were going to do when we got there. And it was a bit scary, really, because we came off the plane, heard all the crickets, and some of the guys that were on the plane said, well, where are you going? And we said, well, actually, we don't know. And he said, well, you can't go any. There's no taxis or anything. Well, in those days we couldn't have afforded them anyway. And he says nothing like that at the airport. So you better get on our bus. We're taking the holidaymakers into Benidorm. So we said, okay then. So we went into Benidorm and we stayed in the hotel that night, which wasn't very expensive. And then the next day we found a small pension, which was 25p a night. And that night, my friend had all her money stolen. We only had £50 each anyway.
Oh, no.
And she had all her money stolen. And so then we had to get a job. Well, I spoke Spanish because I'd done it in school.
Yeah.
So I could have got a decent job, but she didn't. And we were offered a job as dancers, go-go dancers.
In a club, obviously, in Benidorm. Right?
It wasn't, it sounds worse than it was. We just had to encourage people to come into the club
and
then dance on a dais, and it was the 70s and it was, it was quite an interesting time.
And we had a ball.
Oh, we did have a great time.
Two young girls in Benidorm.
At 17 and... I'll never forget Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and Yellow Submarine were the big songs of the day.
Yeah.
we danced all night to those songs, and it was very interesting. But we had to be extremely careful because we could easily have been exploited, but because we were so naive, we actually didn't really know what was going on. So we managed to avoid all of the things that a lot of girls do fall into in that sort of arena.
Can't imagine doing it these days, though, can you?
No, I can't imagine it at all. I remember one day my father, he rang. I told them where I was working, and he either wrote to me or rang this club, and he said that one day he was going to come over and see me. Well, I never expected him to because it's a long way to drive and he never would have flown in those days. So I didn't expect it. And then one day the boss of the club that we were working at said, "Oh, your mother and father have been in this morning." And I was absolutely horrified because they didn't know what I was doing. And I said, well, first of all, I didn't believe them.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, you have a little sister. She's 5 or 6. And I went, "Yes, that's right." And then I realised that they were actually here. So they gave me permission to have an hour or so off to meet them that night because they were coming back at a certain time. I can't remember. And I'll never forget it because all my clothes were falling off my back because it was, we were dancing all night and sweat was pouring off us the whole time and our dresses were going into holes. And my father bought me a new dress. I'll never forget that. It was so amazing to have this new dress.
And was he okay with you dancing?
They didn't know.
Oh, they didn't know.
I managed to keep it under wraps.
Right, okay.
And they only stayed for a couple of days. And they'd taken, I think, about 3 days to drive all the way down to the south of Spain. It's a long way for them to come.
Yeah.
But it was really nice to see them.
Yeah. So what happened? So how long were you in Benidorm for then?
We were there for about 9 months, and then we met some Dutch boys who said, "Why don't you come back to Amsterdam?" So they took us in the car back to Amsterdam, and we worked in Amsterdam for a little while, and I had completely run out of money, so I had to ring my father cap in hand and said, would he send me some money for the ferry home? Which he did. It was £25, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
And he was just so pleased to get me home.
Yeah.
But I didn't stay long. I only stayed for over Christmas, and then I went back to London. My friend suddenly appeared at the door one day and said, "You're coming back, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, okay." So I went back.
And job-wise, did you have a job to go to, or you?
No, I got a job when I got down there, and I used to work for. I worked for a couple of entrepreneurs who set up a company that recruited people from Hammersmith to work in the factories down in Surrey, because the people in Surrey, the factories, couldn't get good people. So we used to recruit them in Hammersmith, and then we'd send them down there in minivans to work the lines, particularly cosmetics. Gala Cosmetics, I remember, was one of our customers. And I learned so much then, and they gave me so much responsibility that before I knew it, I was kind of running the place. And I have this amazing work ethic anyway, and that's one of the things that my father instilled in me when I was young. And so I was always very much focused on work and how to get the best out of people and myself as well. I was always pushing the boundaries as to what I could do, and I was always saying, well, let me do that. And eventually they did, and I learned an awful lot about people, about personnel, and we had honestly, some of the girls that used to work on those lines, that the Irish women that we took down to Gola Cosmetics. And it was really, really interesting the way they got cosmetics out of that company through security. It was really, they found all sorts of ways to bring stuff out.
So were you finding that your strength, if you like, was the people side of business? Because it sounds like you didn't really have a plan. You were a free spirit. You took these opportunities as they came along, which is quite entrepreneurial, I think. But as your career was developing, what was it that you were discovering you were really good at?
I think that I didn't have a plan, that's for sure. I didn't have a plan. Well, the only plan that I had was that I was going to be good at something and that I was going to earn a lot of money. That was my big thing. And mainly because I wanted to have a choice. I didn't want to be... I always wanted to earn my own money. I never wanted to be beholden to my father or a man or whatever. I just always wanted to have my own money. And that was my big driving force. So it wasn't that I was always striving to get more money from a job point of view, but more experience to allow me to sort of go to the next stage, I suppose. And I started doing all the recruitment and looking after the girls. And believe you me, if you've looked after a load of Irish women working out of Hammersmith, going down to Surrey and dealing with all their problems, you get pretty good at personnel.
Yeah.
So it was kind of where I was going. I didn't realise at the time, but I then started to do more and more on the personnel side. And I met a boy, an antique dealer actually, in London, who came from Sheffield. And he was a very good friend of my next flatmate, who was an antiques dealer. And we lived in a flat on Hammersmith Bridge. And she introduced me to this guy, and he then persuaded me to go to Sheffield. And in Sheffield, I became a recruitment consultant because of my experience in recruiting down there.
Yeah.
And so that sort of set me on the personnel route.
Yeah.
And then...
and brought you north.
And brought me north,
closer to where we are today.
Yes, yeah, in Sheffield.
And your initial exposure to antiques maybe as well?
Yes, very much so. Because with Howard, he was a dealer, a very good dealer, and he had a shop in Sheffield. And we used to go all over the country buying antiques. And we did a lot of shipping in those days. We shipped all over the world, to America, particularly to Australia. We had quite a lot of Australian customers. And we used to go out and buy specific things for them. Some of them you wouldn't really call antiques, but they were what was required by those particular dealers. But I did learn all about antiques from Howard, who was an amazing teacher, and I absolutely adored them, and that was something that I really wanted to do.
And the rest is history.
Well,
as far as the antiques are
I guess so. But during that time, I was working as a recruitment consultant, and I got very, very friendly with a company called Neil Tools in Sheffield, and their recruitment officer. And he said, you should be working for us in recruitment. We're looking for somebody. Why don't you come and join us? And that was my first foot on the professional ladder, I suppose, because by this time I'd gone back to Polytechnic and I was doing Institute of Personnel and Training Management. So
you decided that was your career path then, as far as HR personnel, as it was called back in those days. But
yes, I thought it was, yes. Yeah. And so I decided to get the qualification and went back to college to do that. And I became recruitment officer. Then I was promoted to personnel officer. And during that time, I was headhunted by a company who wanted me to go and work for a big steel company in Sheffield. So I went to work as the personnel manager there, and I had some really interesting experiences. I had 55 trade unions to deal with.
Wow, 55.
55.
Oh my God.
It was in those days when, I used to call them the flashers and the flashers and the flushers. That's the electricians and plumbers.
Yeah.
A whole load of unions.
Yeah.
Because it was a big factory, a steel factory, and they were very militant, incredibly militant. And I worked for a small division who made load cells, and ours weren't too bad, but very, very militant. And I know one day I'd gone out to lunch and I came back and they were all walking down the road and I'm going, what's going on? What's going on? And they said, oh, we've had a problem. They've let an apprentice do a job that they weren't allowed to do. And we're off. And it was a lovely summer's day. So I knew that they weren't going to be back for a few days because they all wanted time off, didn't they? In the summer, it was a really hot summer that summer. And so they just all walked out.
And was your job the industrial relations then?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And when I got back and the MD was going absolutely off his head at me saying, what's going on here? Why didn't you know about it? And I said, well, this morning everything was absolutely fine. Nobody mentioned anything. And it was obviously a management issue because they weren't allowed to use apprentices to do particular jobs. And this apprentice had picked up some tools and the managers had allowed him to carry on. And in those days, they just, at the drop of a hat, they would have walked out.
Yeah, down tools and out the door.
Yeah, so that was really, really interesting. And I was only a young girl and I was dealing with 55 trade union officials and walkouts and strikes and all sorts of things. We brought in some consultants at the time called Esprit, and I worked with them and they headhunted me and said, come and work for us as a personnel management consultant. And they gave me a car. So I was absolutely beside myself. And
you could say bye-bye to the trade union reps, which must have been another benefit as well. So you got a car, new job?
A new job, a car, Talbot Horizon, which was brand new. And up until that time, I'd had a Ford Fiesta or something awful, which kept breaking down on the road because the starter motor went, which I actually learned very early on how to reset, but it wasn't very, very good when I was on the big Sheffield roundabout, so I decided to pack in. So yes, I was absolutely thrilled with this car, and I thought, this is it, I've made it now, I'm a consultant.
Yeah. So how long did you do the consultant role for?
Well, my first job was back with Davies. They employed me as the personal management consultant.
Oh, right. Okay.
Interestingly. So I still had all these guys to deal with.
Yeah.
And we had industrial relations issue with unfair dismissal, strikes looming and all sorts of things. And one day my then boss came in and said, Linda, I'm sorry. We can't do this because the liability issues around us dealing with these kind of problems are just too big. You're going to have to learn how to sell. And I went, sell?
Consultancy?
I'm a personal management consultant. I don't want to sell anything. He said, well, it's either that or down the road.
Yeah.
He said, we'll teach you. He said, you can sell anyway, but we'll give you the basics, because all of the guys I was working with at ex-IBM, and they ran sales schools for computer companies.
Right.
And they were absolutely brilliant, but they got me to start up another division. But then they realised that the liabilities were potentially huge and it wasn't worth it. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And my job was then to sell the training and the training programs that they were running. But before that, they put me through sales school, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. Mm. And I learned how to sell, and I realised that actually I was quite good at selling. Mm. And I seemed to be able to sell almost anything. And so we started to bring in new programs. And I thought, I'm not really a computer expert, so wouldn't it be great if I did something different within the company? And I approached House of Fraser, who at the time had a sales training program, a video-based sales training program. And I approached them and asked them if we could actually use their videos to develop a sales training program, which they would have access to. And maybe shoot some extra videos in their store, because my boss then was a very good training developer, and he was developing training packages, video and audio-based training packages for the computer industry, sales computers. And they agreed to let us do it. So we developed a retail sales training program. And so I then headed up the retail division of this company called Esprit. And we were hugely successful. I'll never forget, one day I lived up in Sheffield, and by now the company had moved down to Chesham in Buckinghamshire. And so I was down there from Tuesday to Friday, and I'd been married. I was married as well at the time. And I used to travel down Tuesday, come back Thursday or Friday. And on the Tuesday when I moved down, they were all outside of the office, and I couldn't understand what was going on. And I know I'd just closed this big deal with Debenhams, but they had got the first check in for £250,000, and they'd blown it up, this huge big check, and put it on all the steps on the way up to the office. And there was a big sort of champagne reception, so it was the biggest check they'd ever had.
And that was because of you?
Yeah, it's actually sold to Debenhams. I forget how many people went through the training program, but the check was £250,000.
So clearly sales was where you were, where you meant to be.
I absolutely loved it. Yeah. Really loved it.
How fortuitous then that your boss at the time moved you from personnel into sales.
I know, because it stood me in good stead for my whole life.
They do say, don't they, if you can sell, then you can succeed in business. Yeah.
I think that's true, actually, really true.
Yeah.
And so we developed on from there. So I was head of the retail division, and then I got shares in the company. And the company went from strength to strength. And we were approached by Hey MSL. They wanted to buy us. And we were all really excited because we were all going to earn a lot of money. And all of a sudden, I think it was Black Friday or something like that came along, and all of the IT companies all the shares just went overnight. It was a horrendous time. And so Hey MSL backed out of the deal, and we then ended up going back to where we were, which was very distressing for my boss, he really, really wanted to sell the company. And I wanted to get out by that time. And in the end, I persuaded them to buy my shares. So I sold them, I think, for £40,000, which at the time was an awful lot of money. And decided to set up on my own. So that's what I did. And I set up a company, which was a training company.
In Sheffield, is this?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was in Sheffield initially. And no, it wasn't. No, by that time I'd moved to Bawtry, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
It was in Bawtry. And, we had a really interesting few years, but it didn't really work out the way I wanted it to work out. I had a massive contract with Harcross Builders Merchants, and I trained 5,000 people in their organisation and all the branch managers in this quality service program which we developed. And I developed it with David Kilburn, who's now my husband. And he and I ran this program called Quality Service Program throughout of Harcross, and we went on a road show all around the country, training up the. First of all, actually, it was a road show, and it was a big event, and we had a guy. He used to be called. What was his name? John Fenton. He was a sell guy. He used to have a big white suit, and he'd go onto these big podiums all over the country, selling his program, which was sell.
Yeah.
And he was the main attraction. And then we would then present the quality service program, which was going to turn around Harcross, because I used to work for all of the big retailers prior to this. Debenhams was one of them. Rolf Halpern, I did a lot of work with him, with Topshop and all of those kind of companies, doing the sales training. I did a lot of credit training and stuff like that. So the builders merchants had heard about this program, and they approached me and said, do you think you could train builders merchants to sell? Well, yes, of course, I would say yes.
Yeah.
And that's how we got into builders merchants. So I worked for Harcross for quite a few years. And I went into not just the quality service training, but I started to do business training, business planning, and I worked with their board on business plans and so on. And at the same time, I was working for other clients, but they were a big client of mine for about 5 years. I worked for people like Meadowhall, doing business training, business planning, service training.
And how old were you at this time, just to get a feel for where you are in your career?
I would be,
roughly,
I don't know, about 40,
right.
45. Because meanwhile, I'd gone back to Leeds Business School to do an MBA.
Right, okay.
Because everybody thought I had a degree, and I didn't. I only had a postgraduate diploma.
Yeah.
And
That was your personnel
yes,
training that you'd done, yeah.
And I used to think, I felt that I needed to have something because I was a consultant and people assumed that I had a degree.
To be taken seriously, do you think?
Well, yes, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And so I did my MBA at Leeds Business School and nothing changed. Nobody asked me about it and I didn't have to tell anybody about it. But it made me feel good.
Yeah.
And it made me feel like I was not an imposter.
Yeah.
That I was actually capable of doing the things that I've been doing for years.
And you probably found it interesting as well doing the course.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
One of the other things about me is I love to learn. Every day I'm keen to find something new or think about how I can do something a bit different to anybody else. I really love learning about new things and just new knowledge, new information. IT and all that whole area fascinates me in the way things are moving at the moment. And even in where I am now, we're looking at sort of new ways of doing things and how to be more productive and so on. So I've always been a bit like that.
So you touched on your marriage to David and builders merchants. We can't obviously ignore the story of MKM. This isn't a podcast about David and MKM, though. This is a podcast about you. But just very quickly tell us how MKM came about with you and David setting it up. Okay.
Well, I was working as a consultant with David and Harcross. So by this time, I'd been working 5 years on and off in Harcross, which is now Georgian's. And I'd learned so much about business and about how to get the people who worked in builders merchants motivated and incentivized to do something a bit different and to work in a slightly different way. So I learned an awful lot about it. And David was, Harcross decided to reorganize their business and they closed down the eastern region, which was based in Grimsby, where David was. And David was made redundant and he was absolutely mortified. He was 50 and he was made redundant. And so it was a really, really hard time for him. And I said to him, well, he was always keen to set up a new business after he got through the grieving process of being made redundant. Yeah. And so, I mean, he was left with, we had no money. We lived in a rented accommodation. A friend of David's let us live in a house in Reading Room Yard. And we had no money, we had no furniture. He had his redundancy pay, which they refused to pay him for some time. And that was £40,000 he had. And I had a house in Bawtry, which hadn't sold. And that's all we had between us, so we had nothing. And we lived there for a while, hand to mouth, and we were then I said, come on, let's start thinking about what we're going to do next. And he rang a couple of people up who really were very upset about the fact that he'd been made redundant and wanted to work with him. So we sat down and wrote a business plan, basically. And then we started to go out there and trying to find funders and suppliers who would support us. And we worked very closely with a very good friend, Peter Murray, and his wife Janet. And so the four of us were really sort of trying to set up the whole business. And so we had the plan, and then we started to go out there and meet people and so on. And a number of people were very supportive of us and helped us to set up MKM. And so that's how it started, really. David and myself, Peter and Janet were the the founders, if you like.
And it started in Grimsby then? Is that where it's first?
No, we were in Hull because it was Grimsby where the head office of Harcross was, but we all used to travel over there. So
right, okay.
We lived in Hull. But we, as I say, we had nothing, and David and I used to live hand to mouth at that time. But gradually the business started to go. We had a few people who were really kind to us, people who wanted to find accommodation for us, suppliers who wanted to support us. And it was amazing. And almost from day one, it started to go extremely well. And we had one guy who gave us all his business, and that gave us the cash flow that we needed to set up. And gradually we started to open a branch. A very good friend of ours built a a branch for us in Stoneferry.
Yeah.
And he was a part of the business initially as well. And other people were just fantastic. Suppliers supported us, even in the face of a lot of flack from some of the big corporates. And that's how we got started.
Scary but exciting at the time, wasn't it?
Unbelievable, And to think that David was 50 and I must have been about 45, something like that. Yeah. But we made it work, and
But you had all that experience from your other roles to bring to the table to be able to do it. You knew how to do a business plan. You knew how to recruit people and to sell.
I know, it was actually, we always call it Team Kilburn because we've got really complementary skills.
Yeah.
And David is a brilliant merchant, and he's got the ability to talk to anybody in the business about it, and he's great, So he had all of those skills, and I had all of the business management, business development, all of the skills associated with running a business. And Peter Murray was absolutely amazing. He was a top salesperson, and he could sell anything to anybody, and people used to follow him. He had an amazing customer base. We had some really good customers who came with us. So all in all, we had a really good team.
And MKM is one of the region's success stories. I mean, it even now continues to go from strength to strength. How many branches has MKM got now? Over 100, isn't it?
Yeah, it's over about 130, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a fantastic story. We could spend hours talking about MKM. So congratulations to you and David on the success of MKM. So you were at MKM for how long before you left?
Well, initially I wasn't working full time because obviously they couldn't afford a full time person like me, so I used to do bits and pieces, helping them out with anything that they needed to help with. And I still carried on doing the management consultancy because I had to bring in some money to keep us alive. And so I was working for people like Hall. I did an awful lot of work with them and other quite big businesses. So it was a while before I joined them, and I started to work in the caravan industry, selling into that industry, and I set up MKM Leisure, and so I became the MD of MKM Leisure, and I took it from about 60,000 a month to over $1 million a month, and it was just fantastically successful, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the caravan industry. I loved everybody in it. We had such a good time. I went all over the world. I went to China a few times on my own.
And what were you going there for?
To find products.
Right, okay.
Because I was one of these people, a very curious person, and I used to go to the lawns every year.
Yeah,
and I go around the caravans, and I then go and see the guys and say, where are you buying that from?
Yeah.
Who are you buying that from? How much are you paying for that?
Yeah.
And then I would be armed with all that information. A lot of the stuff was from China. But they were paying quite a lot of money bringing it in from America. But the Americans were buying it from China. So I figured if I went to China and found the factories, then I would be able to supply it. So that's what I did. And I had some really scary situations in China. You can imagine going on my own. The first time I went, I was due to meet a friend of a guy who owned a Chinese restaurant in Brig. Hong Kong Lai he was called. And he was supposed to be meeting me in Hong Kong and taking me over the new territories into China to go to some factories over there because his brother-in-law was a factory owner. So I got to Hong Kong and got off the plane. There's nobody there. I didn't know what to do because I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do.
And you didn't know who this guy was, other than you were just meeting him there?
I had a telephone number, but I couldn't. I rang this number and he didn't answer.
Oh, God.
Anyway, I was there for about an hour, and all of a sudden I heard this voice going, Miss Linda, Miss Linda. And I thought, oh, thank God for that. Anyway, he came and we got on a double-decker bus and we crossed the new territories in this double-decker bus over to the Chinese border. Bearing in mind, I had a suitcase and 2 suitcases, one full of samples.
Yeah.
And we had to walk across the Chinese border, which was quite a long way with these suitcases. And by now it was pitch black. And I was really a little bit scared.
Yeah,
thinking, what am I going into? And anyway, at the other end, these 2 guys met us who were supposedly his relatives. And it was in a really awful car. And we got in this car and we drove through this these terrible towns that were all, shanty towns really. And I was really scared. And I thought, well, I don't know where they're taking me or what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, after about 2.5 hours of driving, by now I was really shattered, you can imagine. I was really tired. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this sort of shanty town, there was this ginormous door. A door. It was, if you can imagine, a big Chinese door with the big, like handles on them, with the big round handles. Yeah. And we approached it, and it just opened. And we drove into this oasis. It was absolutely unbelievable. Beautiful gardens, running water, this fabulous house. I was absolutely, I couldn't believe it.
I thought you were dreaming. You'd fallen asleep.
Because it was in the middle of a shanty town. Yeah. And what they were telling me was this guy was an entrepreneur, and he set up an underwear factory. And he was one of the first Chinese millionaires. And he'd made all his money and he built these houses, but he didn't want to move from the shanty town where he was brought up and all his family were. So he just built his house in the middle of the shanty town.
Oh, I'm pleased it had an happy ending. I thought you were going to say something awful had happened to you while you were in...
No, honestly, they were amazing. I mean, there were a few scary moments because they took me to... they asked me if I'd like a massage and I said yes.
Oh, God.
Yeah, lovely. So they took me to this place and these men came down the stairs and they were all blind. And they took me up the stairs and I was thinking, I was just with the men because the women never came anywhere. And I thought, well, what's going to happen now? And I didn't realise that they took you up into this room and we all had beds to lie on, but you all kept your clothes on. And these blind guys gave you this massage, which is the best massage I've ever had in my life. It was absolutely unbelievable. And it was just, but it was really scary in the beginning. I didn't know what to expect.
You really do strike me as somebody who says yes to everything and then just see where it takes you.
Well, I suppose I can, generally speaking, read people. I can see if people are kind. Generally speaking, that's not always worked for me, but generally speaking. But I did get into a couple of situations. And some of the factories that I went to, they took me out to dinner. And because I was 5'5", blonde, blue eyes. In South China particularly, where everybody was at least a foot smaller than me, and I go into the restaurant and people would stop eating, and they thought I was a film star.
I can imagine.
It was really good for the ego, actually.
So MKM Leisure obviously did very, very well. So what happened? You left there in...
Well, I didn't actually leave. What happened was I felt that after I got to the million, because that was my goal.
Your target, yeah.
And when I got to 1 million, I thought, you know what? I want to do something a bit more cerebral, something that, challenged me a bit more. And I was really interested in websites and marketing, and I'd always been keen on sales and marketing, and I've done that actually in leisure, of course. So we didn't have a department really. So I went across to the to be in the support services
at MKM.
At MKM. Yeah. So I just changed horses really, and set up all the website and set up the marketing department. And obviously we were growing at a great rate of knots at the time, and it was quite hard to keep up with everything. And we were at the forefront of all the new branches. We did all the new branch openings and went all around the country, training up the people there and making sure they were set up with the right customers and that they knew exactly what they had to do in terms of getting to the top. So we used to analyse all the businesses in relation to what other businesses had done and how long it would take them to get to a particular level of sales. And it was a really, really interesting time. I loved being in that sort of area. So
and the growth accelerated at that time. I remember.
Yeah,
you were opening branches. Well, it felt like every week. Probably wasn't as regularly as that, but
well, yes,
a lot of growth.
We had a couple of transactions as well with private equity, and that was quite fascinating. Being involved in all of that, working on the selling the business and the idea of the business and how good we were, and where the future lay and so on. So that was a really interesting time for me, meeting lots of interesting people and moving to London and not moving to London, but working in London in the city and so on. So yeah, that was good.
So you decided to leave MKM and make way for a new generation.
Yes.
Was it hard to walk away from a business that you'd set up back in the day?
It was so hard. Honestly, I really didn't know how hard it was going to be because I've always worked, so I don't have any children. Not through choice, but it just didn't happen. And so I've always worked all my life. So I knew it was going to be hard, but everyone kept saying, "Oh, you'll love it. You know, you'll be really surprised." And I thought, well, I don't think I am going to love it, but I knew it had to happen, and we had to go one by one and bring new people in to come behind us. And David said, "Look, you know, we don't want to not do anything when we retire. So why don't you go ahead and set up a business, and then by the time I finish, we'll have a business that we can run that we want to do."
And did he try and influence what that business might be, or was it a free rein? You can do what you want.
No, I think I could have done what I wanted to do, but as it happened, they'd always been talking about setting up some kind of wedding business, which I never wanted to do. But I've always been interested in renovating property, and in my life I've renovated probably, I don't know, a dozen properties, both here and abroad in Mallorca, which is one of my loves. And I really, really like doing that. And Hotham Hall, Stephen and Caroline, who owned Hotham Hall, they kept talking to me because I used to go down there and look at the
because you were living in the village at the time, weren't you?
Yes, I was, yeah. And I loved Hotham Hall. Thought it was a lovely place, but far too big for anything that I wanted to do.
Because it was their private home, wasn't it?
It was their private home.
I didn't know that until I was reading about it. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, it was
big private home.
Massive.
Yeah.
And I think it was really getting too much for them because it just needed to be, it was a bit tired, but they kept it really well, the structure and so on. So they kept talking to me, and I kept going down there and seeing it. And they kept saying, "Oh, you'd be great at buying this." And so anyway, as we decided that I was going to leave, Stephen had put a letter through in my door saying, "Look, if you want it, you better start thinking about it now because we're putting it on the market next month." And it was a beautifully handwritten letter. And he said, "Why don't you come down and have some wine with us?" So because we
want to get you drunk, so you buy it. Yeah.
I know. So we went down, and David said, "Whatever happens, we're not buying Hotham Hall." And I said, "I know, it's too big. It's a project that I don't even want to anticipate. And I can't see how I'm ever going to make it, a nice home and a business." So that's how we went down there. And after drinking a bottle of wine on their beautiful terrace, watching the sunset, we somehow bought the house. And when we came out, I looked at David and he looked at me and said, "Have we just bought Hotham Hall?" Yes.
And to put it in context, it's not just a house, it's an estate of how many acres? 100 plus
it's
acres?
115 acres now.
115 acres, yeah, it's an estate. That was an interesting bottle of wine.
It was.
I hope it was a good one.
It was a very good one, yes.
So when was that then? Well, that was just before COVID, was it?
It was pre-COVID, yeah. And it was quite a difficult period because there were times we changed our minds a couple of times during that period.
Well, you sobered up the next day, probably.
I know. But we felt that we couldn't let them down because they were, but they wanted to stay there during COVID because they felt comfortable there and they didn't want to move house at that time. So that suited us as well. And so it wasn't until after COVID that we actually exchanged and went on to buy it.
But you must have realised, joking aside, you made the decision because you could see the potential of turning it into a public venue as opposed to just a private home.
Yes, very much so. But I had probably no idea at the time about how exciting the whole thing could be and what we could actually do with it. And that it was quite good that we had that time during COVID and also the development and of the whole project. It taught me so much, and it brought all my skills together, if you like. So sales skills, building management skills, selling skills, and
people skills.
That whole idea of people and managing projects. That was a big thing, ability to manage a project like that. And at first, I thought, I don't know where I'm going to start. And then gradually, as we started to put in the services, because we had to put all new services in, and electricity, plumbing, all of that was new. That gave me time to be there and to establish what might be possible. And that was really fascinating, to be honest. And the hall itself was great, and that was where we were going to live, and we could see that we would be able to do really exclusive weddings there, stately home weddings, as it turned out, because the house became really special. But the stable block, which is our next phase, is where I think the commerciality of the whole thing will start to come good, because we're developing a new 120 seat space in a big, what was the old coach houses or machine sheds.
Right.
And that's a massive, massive area. And I'm going to develop it like a speakeasy,
right,
so that people can come and when we maybe have a supper club type concept, where we have special events like jazz nights and Sunday brunches and visiting chefs, things like that. And but also it's a big event space, so you could seat 120 people, and we've got a big courtyard which we could extend that significantly more than that.
So Hotham Hall today, tell me about it. What exactly is there?
Well, Hotham Hall, now we've actually renovated the house, and it's a lovely home apart from anything else. Yeah. But it also gives us the ability to run great events there. So
you're obviously living in part of it.
Yes.
And then the rest is open to visitors. Well, not visitors, but to guests who've booked.
Yes. Yeah, it's just a bookable event space. And we do actually use the whole house, with friends. I
can imagine.
We have a bar, which is quite good to be in. Yeah. And there's a ballroom and drawing room, entrance hall, and big terraces at the back. And we have a lovely marquee lawn, and we have a festival field.
Right.
So all of those things are available for hire. And also we have a woodland dining experience, which is second to none.
Yes,
that's
I've heard
great.
About that one. Yes.
We have we recently did a corporate event in the woodland dining space for 100 people, and it was absolutely brilliant, really good. We had all open fires, and we had cordon bleu or Michelin star chefs cooking feast over fire for the corporate gathering, and we had people from all over the world there, which was amazing. So that was a great event with music, entertainment, fabulous food. Our chefs are all Michelin star chefs, or have been part of Michelin star restaurants in the past, and are really, really good at what they do.
Can people come for a meal? Is there a restaurant area, or is it's you've got to book an event there?
Yes, at the moment it's just events. And I don't think we'll ever have a restaurant that's open all the time.
Right.
Other than and the next phase of the development. So we have the Hotham Hall now, which is where we live. Yeah. And that can be hired exclusively. So we've had weddings there.
Yeah. It's a natural wedding. It lends itself to weddings, the setting.
It really does, actually. Yeah. It's a beautiful setting.
Beautiful, yeah.
And we had a 60th birthday party there recently, where they can stay as well. So we have 5 rooms which are available for people to stay in, for guests to stay in. And they're lovely rooms, all different, 5-star, all en suite, all done in different styles. So that's quite a nice thing to have in Hull, because we don't have really 5-star accommodation, do we? So that's the kind of Hotham Hall bit, which is exclusive hire, and the woodland dining area is also available for exclusive hire. We may do some general ones. I'm not sure about that, because selling tickets in the Hull area to people where you have to charge a fair amount of money is quite hard. So I'm not really quite sure if we'll do that yet. If enough people were interested, I think we would. But so the second phase now is the what we call what's a stable block, and there we're developing some club rooms where we thought we might do a private members club or a members club as such, but at the moment we're not sure about whether Hull in this area is ready for that. Although we'd love to do it, and we have had a lot of interest in that. But we also have a 120 seats event space, which is in the old coach house machine sheds, where we'll have big chandeliers and fabric lining the walls, and it will be an absolutely glamorous place, done out in a bit of a speakeasy way, so that we can also have a smaller space where we could run things like visiting chefs, jazz nights, special events of all sorts of things that we've got planned that we might run there. So that would be on a kind of one-off basis, but we would market it initially to Friends of Hotham Hall, or whatever we're going to call it, whether it's club members or Friends of Hotham Hall or whatever. They would get first chance. Yeah. And we would run them every couple of weeks, probably. And so we'd bring stuff to Hull, which probably doesn't happen at the moment. And that's quite exciting, I think, that whole phase. And the new event spaces, it's just going to be amazing. And we're developing 11 more suites, 5-star suites, right, in the other part of the other wing of the hall, in the stable block. And we are developing a spa.
Oh, wow.
So the spa is going to be, it's a Japanese themed spa, and it will have an indoor-outdoor pool, it'll have treatment rooms, yoga studio, and we're very much thinking along the lines of well-being and health. Yeah. And
will you have day visitors for the spa? Or
yes, we
right,
will.
Okay.
So everything will be bookable.
Yeah.
Everything will have to be booked, but it will be day spas. Yeah. It'll also be members. Yeah. And also the Friends of Hotham, or the club members, or however we decide to develop it, that would be part of what they were able to take advantage of.
How exciting. It's clear you're still enjoying it. I can see the passion. I mean, how fantastic that you got to revisit your love of antiques.
Yes.
As part of this whole project as well. And then I can see your enthusiasm and excitement for the future plans as well. So are you still enjoying it?
Oh, I'm absolutely loving it. And we've been on these day trips, several weekend trips, buying antiques. Myself and Rachel Waugh, who was my right-hand girl, she was my head of marketing at MKM and is now our events and marketing director. She and I, we both love antiques, so we'll go to Newark Antiques Fair, we'll go down to Tetbury, we'll go all over the place looking for antiques. And we've really, really enjoyed that. And we had Drew Pritchard run a programme there. In fact, it's on this week.
Is it?
On Wednesday, on Quest at 9:00. And we're terrified because that morning we woke up and said, well, what are we going to wear? And we thought, well, we've got to go out into the sheds, because he wanted to go out into the sheds where all our antiques and everything were as well, that we hadn't used. And so we thought, well, we better have, trousers and boots and things. It's going to be cold, etc. And we both saw some of the photographs and thought, what were you thinking? Why did we dress like that? Why didn't we think more carefully about what was going to happen? So now the programme's going to be aired and we haven't seen it. Yeah. We've only got a couple of photographs. So we don't know what it's going to be like.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Congratulations on Hotham Hall estate. It's clearly been something that you've loved doing and are continuing to love to do. I just want to think, if you look back over your career, a varied career where you've done lots of different things, and you said right at the beginning you didn't have a plan. Is there anything you would have done differently?
I'm not sure there is when I look back. I mean, there are times when I've let my heart rule my head when perhaps I shouldn't have done. So I probably would have recognised that decisions make destiny. And, you often get to a crossroads in life and you take the right road instead of the left road. Mm. And that sets up a whole new chain of events, which, had you really thought about why you went down the right road, you might not have done that. So I'm a great believer in that. That's a phrase that crops up time and time again. Decisions make destiny. And I think some young people today, they are ruled by their heart, particularly young women, when it comes to boyfriends and getting married and all this idea. And actually, if they really thought about the person that they were with and thought about where they wanted their life to go, they might do things differently. Yeah. If I was talking to my 16-year-old self, I still would have said, go down to London, go abroad, do the travelling, very definitely, because it's the tapestry of life that you weave, isn't it? And the experiences that you have that make you who you are. Yeah. So I don't think I would change any of that. But there are a couple of things now that I realise, had I made a different kind of decision and had I thought about it more, I might have gone down a different route.
But you wouldn't be where you are now.
Absolutely.
And you're not in a bad place.
I'm definitely not in a bad place.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would that be?
I suppose important people in my life, I've perhaps let them influence me more than I should have done. Because had I been my own person all along, I would have probably taken a different route. Not to say that the route that I've taken is bad or was wrong. It's just that I've probably done things for other people rather than thinking I should have done that for me. I should have set up my own company. I wanted originally to set up my own company, furniture company, that I wanted to be a multi-site locations. I'd been to the States and I'd seen the way that they did things, and that's one of the things that I was going to do when I met David. And obviously, my path took a different way.
Do you feel that MKM was maybe David's dream, and you parked your dream to allow him to pursue that, maybe?
Yes, I think that's really what happened. But I mean, it's been a fabulous trip.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I've been all over the world and I've had an amazing time.
Yeah.
But if I think back, there were a few decisions that I probably could have done that had I decided, no, that's what I wanted to do. But actually, it may not have worked out anyway, because I may not have had the skill set at that time to do it. I obviously thought I could do it at the time. But the stars aligned when I met David, and we had such common interests and a common goal, I suppose, and the mix of skills that allowed us to go on and develop MKM and have an absolutely fantastic lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, like I said before, huge congratulations to you and to David on the success of MKM and the success you've had thus far with Hotham Hall Estate, and I'm sure it'll continue to thrive. Do you worry about anything? Is there anything that keeps you awake at night?
Yes, perfection. I'm absolutely obsessive about anyone that comes to Hotham Hall. I want them to arrive and go, wow, I didn't even know this place existed. And
I think you probably get most people saying that.
And then I want them the experience. I want it to be amazing. So I'd like to be able to step back more, but I find it really, really hard to do that, because I see things that other people don't see. I'm not saying that I'm the be all and end all, but sometimes it's the detail that makes something really special. Just a little thing that you can do that will make that experience so much better. And I just think that if I'm not there, then sometimes those things don't happen. And to me, they're so, so important. And that's what changes an experience from an ordinary experience into a wow experience.
Yeah.
So the wow factors, actually some of the people that work for me, or with me, shall I say, don't really work for me. We all work together as a team. They all have their own wow factors now. And that's really good. And we've just taken on a new events manager who's absolutely superb. She's really, really good. And I think she's going to be a massive asset. And they have their own experiences and their own ways of making it a wow. But I still want to be there and just sort of like check it all out.
It's because you care. It's your baby at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I can't really call it a baby. Well, it's 1700 and something, isn't it? It dates back to as a Georgian. Not quite a baby.
A 300-year-old baby.
I'm just conscious of time, so we're going to have to wrap up, unfortunately, because I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. But we talked about your dad right at the beginning, and you said what he was like in terms of his personality, entrepreneurial. Do you think he's been the person to influence you most through your life?
He certainly was in the early days. Not always for good reasons.
For the right reasons, yeah.
But I learned a lot about men by watching him. Yeah. And about entrepreneurship, if that's the right word. If that is a word, I'm not sure.
Entrepreneurship,
but entrepreneurs anyway. Because he was the original entrepreneur, although he was never really confident that he was that kind of person. And he was a quite special guy. He had a vision, and to turn his farm into a golf course in those days was quite something.
I didn't ask, was it a success, his golf course?
It was a success, yeah.
So he probably did have more influence over you than you probably acknowledged at the time.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I was very proud of him and what he did.
And I'm sure he would have been very proud of what you've achieved as well.
I'd
Incredibly
love him to
proud.
be here now.
Yeah.
Look, I remember my third company car was a Porsche.
Oh.
And I came home in this car and he couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And I won. This is something. Sorry, it's something completely off track.
Go on.
It's just I got this Porsche as a company car, and I won a round the world recognition trip.
Is this for selling? Sales. Yeah.
And so I went all around the world, and I went to open an office up in Australia for the company that I worked for, Esprit, and it was just the most amazing time, to go around the world and to stop off at various places like Fiji.
Oh, I bet. And your dad saw that though?
He saw that,
yes.
And he loved it because his best friend had gone to Melbourne when he was quite young, and he'd become the mayor of Melbourne.
Oh, wow.
And he always wanted to go, but he never did. So the fact that I went was really special.
Yeah. Right. Well, we have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid, because we've definitely run out of time. But thank you. Thanks for sharing your story. It's been fascinating. We've got a question here that was left by our previous guest. He didn't know it was a he. He didn't know who he was leaving it for. So I'm going to ask you that, if I may.
You may. I'm sure I can answer
It's a good question. Has there been an occasion in your life where your opinions have been flipped 100% by someone? And if so, what was it and why did you change your mind? That's a good question. I feel awful putting you on the spot with it.
It's a question that needs a bit of thinking about, I think. That's the problem. I think there has been times when I have flipped 100% just because someone has been so passionate about what they were saying and believing in that they convinced me that my opinion should change. I can't think of an example, but I definitely have been there. And I think it's people who are passionate about what they do and their beliefs can change other people's views. I think it's very hard, but the right people can do that. But I can't think of an example where to tell you about at the moment.
It is a tricky question, but thank you for trying to answer that. We're all influenced by other people. We've just all experienced a US election and we could all talk about that for a long time, but we won't. No. We won't. We'll end on a happy note. So thank you again, Linda. Thanks for your time. Thanks for everything you and David have contributed to the local area. I wish you continued success, and I hope Hotham Hall estate continues to go from strength to strength as well.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Good.
I hope I've told my story in the right way.
You have. Thank you.
It's been
Thanks
really
for sharing. Right, that's it this time. I look forward to seeing you again next month. But until then, if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions about who you'd like to see on the podcast, please do let me know. I look forward to seeing you again then. Until then, bye-bye.